In 1965, Ford built an engine so indestructible it could run for 500,000 miles on little more than hope and cheap oil. They called it the workhorse. Mechanics called it God's Anvil. But what Ford's boardroom never expected was that this humble Inline-Six would become their greatest secret and their biggest shame. This is the story of the engine they had to destroy. The birth of a legend. 1964. Ford's boardroom is at war. The air is thick with cigar smoke and corporate pride. On the far wall, a sales chart bleeds red, month after month of losses. Chevy's trucks are eating Ford alive. Dealers are panicking. Rural America is drifting toward the bow tie. The company's V8 aristocrats, men in tailored suits, shoes polished like mirrors, want to fight back the only way they know how, with another chrome-crowned, high-compression 8-cylinder. Something to gleam under showroom lights, something to impress the golf course set. But at the back of the room, one man leans forward, elbows on the table, tie askew. Chase Morsey Jr. Not a desk jockey, an engineer who still smells faintly of gasoline. His hands bear the scars of real work, and his mind carries the memories of busted knuckles in frozen barns. He knows what farmers, ranchers, and construction crews actually need. And it's not another pampered V8. His voice lands like a dropped wrench. You want to win this fight? Build something cheap, brutal, unkillable. The room goes still, then fills with the dry chuckles of the V8 elite. They call it peasant engineering, an insult meant to kill the idea before it's born. But Morsey wears the name like armor. Far from the boardroom's mahogany and glass, Morsey's rebellion begins. He gathers a small, loyal crew in an off-the-map workshop, bare concrete floors, harsh fluorescent lights. Their mission is printed on a single sheet of paper, taped to the wall. Make it run on mud. Make it outlive the truck, Chase Morsey Jr. said. We didn't need another high-strung V8. We needed a tractor engine for the road, something a farmer could fix with a hammer and a piece of baling wire. Morsey's vision was executed by a brilliant, unsung engineer, Carl Renville. His team, hidden away in Ford's Cleveland engine plant, designed a masterpiece of simplicity: 7 main bearings, a forged steel crankshaft, and a cast-iron block you could drop from a barn loft and still bolt into a truck. The stroke was long, the RPMs low. It wasn't built for speed, it was built for punishment. They tested it by running it for 300 hours at full throttle. They tried to seize it. They tried to break it. They couldn't. They start with the bones. 7 main bearings to hold the crank steady through decades of abuse. A forged steel crankshaft that could take a hammering and still spin true. A stroke so long it drags torque up from the bottom of the revs range like a chain from deep water. In that shop, every choice is made for survival. No decorative chrome, no exotic alloys, just raw, unpolished strength. They test in the most merciless ways they know, hauling overloaded trailers, running hot and dry, grinding uphill in too high a gear. They aim to break it. They can't. Meanwhile, upstairs, the executives scoff. Trucks are about image, they say. Farmers want comfort now, power steering, radios. But down in the trenches, Morsey's crew is building something that doesn't care about image. It cares about getting the job done, day after day, year after year, until the truck around it rusts into the earth. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Morsey knows, if this engine sees daylight, it could change everything. Not just for Ford, but for the men who depend on their machines to survive. What they're building isn't just an engine, it's a weapon. One forged in defiance, built for a war fought not in boardrooms, but in fields, job sites, and frozen back roads. A war Ford is about to win. Mechanics quote, "We called it God's Anvil because it was the thing he would use to forge other lesser engines on. You couldn't kill it. I saw one run for 20 minutes with no oil pressure. The rod bearings were welded to the crank. Customer just wanted us to unweld it and send him on his way." But this was only the beginning. The Anvil was about to be taken from the farm fields and thrown into the heart of American racing. The rebel mechanics and the racing. While Ford peddled V8s to the polished shoe crowd, A revolution was brewing in barns and back-alley garages. Men like Mad Mike Davidson stared at the Ford 300's iron block and didn't just see an engine, they saw sin. Something overbuilt, underestimated, and begging to be pushed past the limits its creators ever intended. From the factory, the 300 was a workhorse. Farmers swore by it. Truckers trusted it. It could run all day on bad gas, haul loads that would break a lesser engine, and shrug off abuse like it was born for it. Stock? A humble 122 horsepower. Respectable torque, sure, but nothing that would make a muscle car nervous. Davidson wasn't interested in respectable. His recipe? Brutality meets ballet. Step 1. Rip out the single carb. In its place, a 2x4 intake system, 2 4-barrel carburetors feeding the beast through a custom-fabricated manifold. A rare sight on an Inline-Six, more at home on a 409 or a 426 Hemi. Here, it looked like pure mechanical rebellion. The twin quads transformed the 300's breathing. No more gasping at high revsa. Each carb fed 3 cylinders through a perfectly balanced plenum, shoving in enough air and fuel to keep pace with big blocks. But airflow was only the start. Davidson paired it with a hotter cam, longer duration, higher lift, so the valves hung open and swallowed every ounce of the incoming charge. Free-flowing headers dumped the waste gases with a snarl. A strong ignition system lit it all off like a fuse. The numbers told the story. 328 horsepower, 412 pound-feet, enough to rip a Chevelle apart at the axles. Driving it was like wrestling a grizzly bear in a phone booth. You'd stomp the gas, bam! Your spine compressed, the horizon lunged, and the rear tires fought for their lives. V8s screamed through the gears, desperate. The $300, it just grunted. One long, unbroken shove, and you were gone. Of course, making it work wasn't as simple as bolting on shiny carbs. The manifold had to be perfect. Fuel and air delivered evenly to each cylinder. Carbs had to be matched and tuned in unison, sometimes staged so one handled cruising while the other woke up only under heavy throttle. Davidson sweated over jetting, idle mixtures, and linkage adjustments until the beast was as smooth as it was savage. And then there was the spectacle. Pop the hood at a drag strip, and the crowd would gather fast. 2 polished carbs, fuel lines arched like chrome veins, linkage exposed like clockwork. It was mechanical art, old-school hot rodding with a side of intimidation. For Davidson and his kind, it wasn't just about power, it was about defiance. Taking a so-called farm engine and making it humiliate V8s on their own turf. The Ford 300 didn't just work anymore, it hunted. Racing's dirty secrets. If the backroad grudge matches were the proving ground, Bristol was the baptism by fire. The Lung had already carved a name for itself in the shadows, behind warehouses, on empty county highways, and on strips of asphalt where the only lights came from sodium lamps and taillights disappearing into the dark. But Bristol? Bristol was different. It wasn't whispered in back alleys. It was a cathedral for horsepower, a place where legends were either born or broken under the weight of 1,000 eyes. We didn't roll in quietly. The truck was too loud for that, even at idle. That deep, loping camshaft thump had a rhythm to it, like the slow beat of a war drum before the charge. People turned before they even saw us, heads swiveling at the sound, hands cupping ears as we idled past the ticket booth. The Lung was dressed plain that night, no flashy paint, no vinyl, no decals, but in that underdog way, the lack of show made it more menacing. It was the wolf in work clothes. We parked away from the staging lanes, letting the regulars cook under the fluorescent glare while we stayed in the cool dark by the fence. A few old-timers wandered over, squinting at the engine bay. One of them, a man with a Bristol crew pass and hands blackened from years of wrenching, tilted his head and muttered, "That ain't no V8. What the hell is that thing?" We didn't answer. We let the metal do the talking. When our lane was called, we didn't hurry. Part of racing isn't the run, it's the ritual. Rolling into the staging area slow, letting the idle echo off the guardrails, letting the smell of race fuel bleed into the crowd. We could feel the stares. We could hear the bets being made. The tree dropped. And then, the Lung stopped pretending. It wasn't the kind of launch that jolted you forward. It was the kind that ripped you into the next second before your brain could catch up. Rear tires bit with a violent chirp, suspension squatted low, and the world tunneled. Gears snapped in with a raw mechanical click. Each upshift hit like a hammer blow, that straight six screaming with a pitch that didn't belong to any farm truck motor people thought they knew. The other driver, piloting a polished big block Camaro, barely cleared second gear before we were already pulling hard, headlights shrinking in the mirror. Across the finish, the PA announcer stammered out the times. The crowd noise was split, half disbelief, half laughter at the Camaro guy's expense. We lined up again. Second pass, different victim. Another car with a reputation, gone. Third pass. By now, the crowd had moved closer to the fence. Phones out, people muttering about that Ford 6 thing. We never popped the hood between runs, not out of secrecy, but because the point was never to explain. The point was to show. By the time we rolled back to the pits, people were treating the lung like a ghost story you could touch. Some wanted to shake hands. Some just wanted to see the tires. But the veterans, the ones with grease under their nails and decades of racing in their blood, watched from a distance. They knew what it meant when something this strange, this fast, showed up out of nowhere. It meant trouble. Bristol had been conquered. But for us, it was just an appetizer. The drag strip had rules, lights, and men with clipboards. Out beyond the glow of those lamps was where the real stakes lived. On cracked pavement, with cash in the glove box and no one to wave a flag. And in that lawless dark, the lung wasn't just quick, it was predatory. Leo Santucci, quote, "The V8 guys laughed, called it a six-banger, so we shoved a Clifford intake and twin Holly 450 on it. Cam, headers, it woke up. It didn't scream. It bellowed. A deep, angry grunt that scared the hell out of Camaro drivers. But it wasn't just drag racing. In NASCAR's Sportsman Series, the underdogs embraced the cheap, durable six. In 1973, Shorty Smith's number 23 F100, powered by a worked-over 300, stunned the field. It didn't win on the straights. It won in the corners, its massive torque pulling it off the apex like a freight train. And that was the problem. Ford's performance division was spending millions to win with V8s. The success of a cheap parts bin 6 was an embarrassment. The order came down from Dearborn. Disqualify it. NASCAR quietly changed the rules, enacting stricter homologation requirements that the low-production 300 couldn't meet. The Anvil was banned. The message was clear. Winning was only allowed with the right engine. Ford's betrayal. The engine that could have saved them. 1982 was the year the noose tightened. The EPA's regulations had teeth, and carburetors were the first to bleed. Manufacturers scrambled for solutions, and Ford's answer was as cold as the wind off the Rouge River, fuel injection for the V8s, nothing for the 300s. The Inline-Six that had hauled half the country's freight and turned fields into harvests was suddenly an afterthought. The memo from Dearborn read like a death sentence. The 300 would be phased down, relegated to the slow fade of parts bin limbo. But deep in Ford's engineering basement, there was rebellion. A small skunkworks group, 3 engineers, a machinist, and a test driver, saw the Six's potential. They called their secret weapon Atlas. It wasn't fantasy. It was real metal, real numbers. A turbocharged prototype that belted out 400 pound-feet and still pulled 25 miles per gallon in testing. 7 main bearings laughed at boost. Forged crankshaft spun without complaint. The long-stroke design, originally meant for low RPM grunt, suddenly became a freight train of mid-range surge. Atlas was more than competitive. It was lethal. They presented it to management one gray Monday morning. There was no applause, no raised eyebrows, just the heavy slap of a binder closing. "Nobody wants a 6-cylinder Super Duty," came the verdict. No debate, no testing program, no press leaks. 2 weeks later, every trace of Atlas, test mule, engineering notes, dyno charts, had mysteriously vanished. Officially, it had never existed. By 1996, the last 300 rolled off the line in a pickup bound for some contractor in Kansas. The lights went out. The book was closed. The workhorse had been put down. But death doesn't mean gone. Not if the right set of hands is willing to dig. In a junkyard north of Detroit, under 10 inches of snow and decades of rust, a man named Carter found them. Not the engine itself, that had been recycled years before, but a milk crate of blueprints and component drawings wrapped in a tarp like contraband, fuel maps scrawled in pencil, compressor sizing charts, even a note from one of the original engineers, "She'll take 20 psi if you don't get stupid." Carter wasn't an engineer. He was a builder, the kind who could make a straight edge from a bent frame rail and get a seized bolt loose with heat and faith. And he knew exactly what he was holding. This wasn't just a set of plans. It was an act of defiance, a path to resurrecting something Ford had buried. That winter, the barn became a laboratory. The old Inline-Six block, pulled from a wrecked F-350, was stripped bare, checked for cracks, and built up stronger than Atlas's original spec. Forged rods, custom pistons, ARP studs everywhere. The dual-quad intake from its racing days was swapped for a fabricated plenum with a twin-scroll turbo hanging off the side, oil lines curling like veins. Every night, Carter worked alone. The only soundtrack was the creak of the kerosene heater and the occasional cough of the compressor as he tacked together the exhaust manifold. The snow outside piled high against the doors. In the dark, he would stop sometimes and just stare at it. The rebirth of an engine everyone else had let die. By spring, the 300 was no longer a relic. It was something else entirely. On the dyno, the torque curve looked less like a hill and more like a plateau. Flat, wide, brutal. 412 pound-feet by 2,000 RPM. Horsepower climbing hard past the point most truck engines gave up. Carter didn't brag. He didn't post dyno sheets online. This wasn't for the internet. This was for the street. And when the lung finally rolled out again, paint still dusty, hood latched low, there was no fanfare. Just the sound. At idle, it was calm, almost polite. But touch the throttle and the turbo's low whistle bled into a metallic snarl, the kind that makes conversation stop mid-sentence. The first test run wasn't at a drag strip. It was on an abandoned industrial road outside the city, long and straight with weeds growing through the cracks. Boost came in like a breaker wave, violent and sudden, shoving the truck forward with a force that made the steering wheel feel small in your hands. In that moment, Carter wasn't just driving. He was answering 1982's verdict. The 300 wasn't gone. It had never been gone. It had just been waiting. Frank Miller, retired Ford engineer, phone interview 2005. We presented the data, competitive fuel economy. The 7 main bearings laughed at Boost. It was a diesel killer. The execs looked at the charts, looked at each other and said, "We can't sell a 6-cylinder Super Duty. It'll cannibalize V8 sales." They killed it. It was corporate suicide. The decision was catastrophic. While Ford protected its V8 ego, a little company called Dodge dropped a bomb. The Cummins turbo diesel. It was everything Atlas was meant to be. It stole Ford's entire heavy-duty market overnight. Ford's betrayal was complete. They had shelved their best engine to protect a corporate image, and in doing so, handed the market to their rival. The 300 was left to rot, strangled by emissions laws it was never updated to meet. In 1996, the last 300 Inline-Six rolled off the line in Ohio. The lights went out. The Anvil was dead. Officially, ghost engine. While the Ford 300 Inline-Six was never born for the racetrack, fate and human stubbornness had other plans. Its cast-iron block, overbuilt crankshaft, and glacier-slow rev ceiling were meant for farm trucks and delivery vans, machines that lived their lives in low gear, hauling loads no one else wanted to touch. But torque. Torque was the one thing it had in terrifying abundance. And torque, in the right hands, could win races. It started in dusty rural drag strips and half-forgotten oval tracks. Backyard mechanics, too broke for crate V8s, too proud to settle for mediocrity, pulled the 300 from junkyard Fords, bolted it to mismatched transmissions, and went hunting. In truck pulls, its long stroke ripped sleds down the track with a violence that made diesel boys nervous. In short-track dirt racing, it clawed for traction out of corners where high-revving small blocks just spun themselves dizzy. The first wins didn't make headlines. They made enemies. Every time a straight-six Ford crossed the line ahead of a polished V8, someone in the pits would mutter, "Cheatin' somehow." But tech inspectors found nothing. It was all metal, sweat, and stubbornness, an engine built to plow fields now plowing through egos. By the late 70s, word had spread. Racers were experimenting with dual carbs, high-lift cams, and hand-ported heads. The 300 was waking up, and when it woke, it roared. In certain restricted classes, where displacement rules leveled the playing field, it became the undisputed underdog champion. You didn't choose a 300 because it was the easy path. You chose it because you wanted to prove them wrong. Truck pullers embraced it with near-religious devotion. Its bottom-end torque meant brutal launches, the kind that made the dirt quake, and the block's legendary durability meant fewer rebuilds, which kept privateers alive in seasons that chewed through bank accounts. Even in drag racing, nostalgia classes began seeing these six-cylinder trucks run times no one wanted to believe. Fans came to watch V8s dominate, only to go home talking about that damn straight six. The Ford 300 was becoming more than an engine. It was becoming a statement. We don't need your blueprint to win. But the real story, the one almost no one tells, didn't start in a garage or a racetrack. It started in a quiet Detroit engineering office. His name was Arlen Jensen, a disgruntled engineer. He stole Atlas schematics and built it. They called it Atlas because it could carry the weight of Ford's entire truck division on its back. But Jensen saw more than a workhorse. He saw a weapon. He locked himself away, machining parts no catalog had ever listed. He milled heads until the combustion chambers whispered efficiency numbers engineers swore were impossible. Dynode at 618 pound-feet ran 10.90 seconds in a 95 F-150. Ford found out. They threatened his pension, his family. He dismantled it. But the blueprints? They're still out there. The few who saw it run say the sound was unlike any other straight six. Not just deep. It had weight, like the pavement itself was groaning under its torque. A drag pass wasn't a scream down the strip. It was a charge, relentless, like gravity had picked a side. Ford buried it. Or so they thought. Because in the small, obsessive corners of the racing underground, whispers never die. Engine builders speak of an unaccounted crankshaft order from the mid-90s. A machinist in Dearborn once claimed he was paid in cash to bore 6 cylinders wider than the law allowed. A single photograph, blurred and yellowing, still circulates online. A dyno graph with numbers that make Cummins men sweat in their sleep. What if Jensen hadn't backed down? What if God's Anvil became Ford's weapon? Would Cummins be extinct? Would V8s be history? The truth is buried inside Detroit graveyards. The Ford 300 is a tragedy of what could have been. What if Morrissey's vision had won? What if Project Atlas had greenlit? Would the turbo-diesel war have never happened? Would Ford have dominated the 80s and 90s? But the greatest question remains. A question for you. Share this video if you believe the Anvil should have never been broken. Comment below. What would you do with Arlen Jensen's blueprints? And somewhere, in a locked drawer, Arlen Jensen's blueprints wait. This is Paul from Rare Car Stories. Catch you next time.